since we're still in the brave new world of technology, um, I'll try to monitor the text, the chat room. So if you have questions, feel free to type in the chat box, or if there's any technical difficulties as we go along, if the audio has problems, please let me know. Hopefully everybody can hear me well enough. And then sometimes I've noticed recently, especially in the evening, my guess is everybody in the world is on the internet at the same time, streaming movies and things. So sometimes there's a glitch in the stream. So if you have trouble or need me to repeat something, please let me know. It's not a problem at all. So this is our our brave new world of online Dharma talks. So I'm still getting used to the format. So forgive me if I make mistakes. And since I don't have any fancy setup here, I just have some banker's boxes down here with my notes on them. So it's my makeshift desk. So I see Jamie just shared the link to the PDF. If you're curious, this is the actual text. So you can still find it in print if you prefer, but the PDF is available now for free. You can actually see that I paid $16.50 new long time ago when I bought this. So I still have this copy. So I've had this for over 20 years. And it's still still in good shape. So I still refer to it. Sometimes it's easier to read paper than it is the screen all the time. So I'm sure you can find it for less than $16.50. So there was no Amazon back when I got this. So long time ago. Some of our younger folks in the group are probably surprised by that. So it looks like about 3 minutes after the hour. So I'll do kind of a rolling start to give people time to join. I know sometimes we have folks that join us a few minutes after. So I'll just open up first if there's any questions, either about last week or just questions in general. I'm happy to try to answer those if I can. If I don't know the answer, I'll try to do some research and we can pick up next week with the question. But I know some of you may be coming in the middle of the lecture series. We decided to just continue with our regular lecture on the awakening of faith. So if you have any questions sort of about the book in general, I'm happy to try to answer those as we go through. But I tried to design these so that if you join midway, it's still useful. You still get something out of it. Sometimes the conversation does get a bit technical. So if that happens, let me know. But I try to keep it open for anybody that might drop in on a class or anything like that. So, okay. So seeing no questions to start, I'll also just start off by saying I hope everyone is well and safe and healthy. It's good to see some of you on screen, and everybody looks good and happy, so that's good. But I know we are still all in the middle of a rather unique situation in U.S. history, world history. So I just want to acknowledge that, and there can be a lot of anxiety and emotions just watching this on TV, just having it unfold around us. It's a very different world that we find ourselves in. If you had asked me when we first started studying this text if we'd be in this world right now, I would have said no. It's not something I could have imagined, but here we are. So I will say, and I think I mentioned this before, sometimes the Buddhist teaching doesn't always seem relevant to where we are currently. And I think for those of us living in Western Europe, the United States, Canada, we've been rather fortunate. And that's probably true both for ourselves and our parents' generation. For the most part, we haven't had war or things like that in our own backyard or those kind of difficulties. So some of the realities that Asvagosha and his audience faced day to day. You're talking about a time in history where water wasn't always clean, and things were difficult for people. So I think it gives us an excellent time to reflect that we've been very fortunate the last 70, 80 years of history. For the most part, we've sent people off to war or something along those lines, but it hasn't been directly with us. We make a lot of comparisons right now to Spanish flu and that pandemic. That's probably not something that's in our recent memory, or not something maybe we heard from our parents or family members. So these are kind of natural cycles in human history. And so we may view the text differently. We may view the teaching differently. And I think one really good thing about the Buddhist teaching in general is it's always relevant. It's relevant to difficult situations and, maybe I could say humdrum situations. If it's a normal day and you're just going to the office and the biggest concern you have is traffic, the teaching is still relevant. So I think even more so is it relevant when we have a bigger situation. But I think what's unique about this one, and one that we can reflect on even more, is we're all connected in this one. So our friends in China are going through the same questions and struggles as we are, as our friends in Italy and anywhere around the world. So it's a unique time to reflect on this teaching that way. So the few of us here are connected virtually through technology, but our experience is not different from everybody else in the world really at this moment. So one of the questions that went out, I had an idea for a Buddhist movie discussion group. So we had tried showing some movies at the temple. Most of the movies that are relevant are fairly long. So it ends up being kind of a long evening to show the movie and then have the discussion afterwards. So rather than ask for people to spend 4 hours at the temple, I thought, well, this is a good time when people are at home. So those kind of relevant movies, it might be good to watch them at home and then come and actually do the discussion on Zoom. So we sent out a poll for who might be interested in, and get some feedback on the time. So if you have a chance, please give that feedback, and we'll try to find the most convenient time for everyone. And then we can actually have another meeting to talk about that. And it'll be like school, so I'll send you with some things to think about, or things to bring back to conversation. So, but you can relax on your couch with popcorn and not one of the hard chairs at the temple. So a little bit better. Okay, so I'll jump back in to the Awakening of Faith. In the PDF, it is page 24 going on to 25. I was just curious if the pages were different, so I opened my copy. If you have the hard copy, it's pages 44 and 45. So, and last time we talked about the functioning of the mind, and specifically how the mind reacts to phenomena. So when the mind comes into contact with something external to itself, how does it view and how does it understand what it's perceiving? And if you're a careful reader, of Buddhist literature, you'll see some of the same things repeated in the Heart Sutra. So we're going through the Heart Sutra, and you'll see it's referencing the five senses. So seeing, hearing, taste, touch, aspects of consciousness, this kind of thing. It's discussing how the mind gathers in outside information and how it processes it. So obviously there's a lot of fertile ground for conversations about the intersection of Buddhist philosophy and Western psychology. And for just on my shelf over here, I have several books along those lines, and also those written by neuropsychologists and neurologists and looking at the function of the brain. So there's several ways you can approach this text. You can approach it as very helpful information for how to live your life. You can also approach it from the perspective of a scientist. What can Buddhism tell us about where science kind of ends and then where philosophy begins? There's room in the middle to understand these processes. And I think Buddhism has a lot to offer here. So you can read this from a variety of different perspectives and consider it from those perspectives. I think that's good. So if you're not sure, like which self should I bring to this reading, you can bring a variety of different ones. So you can have your it's the start of a bad joke, right? The priest, the nuclear physicist, and someone else walks into a bar or something, right? So you can bring all of these interests to this reading to consider how does the mind actually function? So how does consciousness manifest? All these kind of things. So, okay. Thank you for Jamie and the actual clarification on the page number. So they're in the chat. So if you're having trouble finding where we are. So I think feel free to bring those different perspectives. I have a background in political science and different things I like to read. So I sometimes bring that perspective to the reading. So I think all of those are relevant and helpful. So don't think of this only from palms folded, sort of this is the only perspective I can see it. I think you should bring your experience to it, and it makes it richer. So the awakening of faith is, in this section, is explaining how the unenlightened states produce three aspects or results. So that's what we referred to last time. Those three aspects or results are ignorance. And I always want to remind people, when you read the word ignorance in reference to a Buddhist text, it has a lot to do with our misapprehension of things. It's not a slur that someone is ignorant or anything of that nature. So that's the first of the three. Then how we perceive subjects, so something outside ourselves, and the idea that the more we view something, the more we view it as external to ourselves, the more we separate ourselves from the thing we're viewing, but also the more we separate ourselves from other people. So it's very common that just by nature of how we're designed as a human being, our eyes are in front, and there's this thing over there, right? It's built into language. If you study Japanese, there's a lot of words for how do you orient something in space and time. And so, it's something is over there or it's next to something else. And these words are very different. And we have the same issue in English. How do you describe where something is? Oh, something is, from my perspective, it's over there next to the desk. Versus someone else, it may be to the left of them. So how we see things has an effect on our thinking, and has the potential, especially from a Buddhist standpoint, importantly, has the potential to cut off our compassion towards something else. We see it as something separate, not something as part of ourselves. So that's what the text is pointing And the third thing is when we see ourselves as separate from any system, um, the more we separate ourselves. So we say, well, it's um, in the coronavirus is a good example. That's happening to those people over there. Then we're able to separate and say, well, somehow I'm different. That's not going to happen to me. So there's all of this sort of false thinking that follows when we do this separation. The more we see things as separate, um, we see things as separate, and then there's very real world repercussions. So we see, extracting fossil fuels and cutting down trees. Well, that's okay. Maybe we made a mess of the earth somewhere else, but not where I live. But then we don't see climate change because it's hard to see that bigger system. Or we have certain priorities in government for a long time, and now we see how a weak public health system has effects for people, right? And it's not unique to this country, it's something that's happening everywhere. So that constant thinking of separation in those terms has these real world consequences for us. So this happens when we look through our eyes. We look through our eyes and we actually perceive separation. We don't see ourselves as part of um, systems. That's not how we talk. We don't say, we say, oh, climate change is a problem. We could probably rephrase that as my whole world is changing. Our whole world is changing. Our whole existence, we are all going to have to make different choices. But we tend to focus on discrete data points, temperature or storm, and we still externalize it. So we don't really see it as a issue that we want to address until we actually say, oh, this is my issue or my problem, or we understand how it affects us. So this is what the Awakening of Faith is pointing out at this stage, is this tendency of the mind and how the mind operates in this way, and trying to help us to see through it. So if we can see through it, then we can change it. If we see it happening, then we can stop it. So and the other thing is understanding that this is how your mind works. So this is a kind of a big question philosophically. How does consciousness function? You may be surprised, and I was surprised. I went to a conference on neuroscience and philosophy a few years ago, and there was no theory of consciousness that everyone agreed on. Everybody had a different theory of consciousness. And the host of that conference was a neurosurgeon, and he says, "Well, I can cut in the brain and I can remove tumors, but I don't know how it works. We really don't know how it works. As a doctor, when I pronounce someone dead, are they really? I could still see neurons firing on the computer, and we can measure brain activity for weeks later. So is that life, or how do we actually understand it?" So it's an open question, and we have different sciences. I would say that the Buddhist teaching has a place in that conversation. It's a very coherent system, and it's structured in a way to allow you to observe. So it gives you a theory and then says now you can observe it happening. And thankfully, you don't have to buy costly scientific equipment or have a special lab. I have a cushion here, and that's what you need. If you add some fine incense from Koyasan, that's also helpful, but you don't have to. So the bigger part here is, I think, to keep in mind. I always want to remind people. In the West, we tend to be very literal, and we tend to take things very, I think, in a very severe way. So if we do something, we tend to think the way to do it is to jump all in and give 120%, and sort of we burn too hot too fast. So in doing this and in understanding the mind, when we're talking about these terms, don't think of them as you're becoming wooden or unfeeling. when the Awakening of Faith or other Buddhist texts are pointing out the nature of mind, or it's talking about emotions, it's saying that the way we experience them takes us out of a peaceful state and actually puts us into agitation. It doesn't say that, any feeling is bad. It's that the way we're experiencing it, the fact that we haven't analyzed it or really looked into it, it is blowing us rather than us driving the ship, right? We're just tossed on the waves. And then we're adrift. And as soon as the storm stops, we go, oh, okay, we're back to normal. But we still don't realize we're not in control of the rudder. We're not steering at all. So when Buddhism is referred to as a middle way, our tendency as human beings is to say, well, if it's not this, then it has to be this complete opposite. And so we miss the middle. So when you read something that sounds really, really severe, try to keep that in mind, that it's not meant to be taken sometimes as we have to do a wild swing back to a different direction. We have to do a course correction, not turn around and go home, or complete switch. So all right, I will start in today. And the text, let's see here. Oh, we have the page number there, so I'll read from here. Conditioned by the incorrectly conceived world of objects, the deluded mind produces 6 aspects. Okay, so here's our first sentence. And this is a really good example of Buddhist teaching methods. Please do take this exactly as it sounds. Here's your professor writing it on the board, saying, okay, the conditioned mind, conditioned by the world of objects, produces 6 aspects. This is dating myself because I'm writing on a chalkboard in my head and there's no more chalkboard. But anyway, so there's 6 aspects. And there will be a test. This will be on next week's quiz, right? This is the way to understand it. So this is a typical, you'll see this in sutras and commentaries. There's always a numbering, a listing out of attributes or qualities. Do you have to memorize them all? I'm not going to say that. However, if you were studying it from the perspective of trying to memorize it all, by breaking it into discrete pieces, you're better able to memorize it. So remember, when Asvagosha was writing, when a lot of these texts were put together, it was not easy to email a copy to someone, or not everyone had a printed copy on their bookshelves the way I did for the low price of $16.50. So you might have to memorize it. So why do we give numbers? It is a great way to memorize things. How do you understand phone numbers? Why are phone numbers broken up into 3 numbers, 4 numbers? It's easier to remember. 777-9311, right? You get it right away. So if someone just gave you all the numbers out, you'd say, wait, what? But if you can break it up into chunks, it's more easy to digest. So this is Asvagosha breaking up the teaching into easily digestible chunks so that you can grasp the concept. So this would be the 6 important points. So he says, first is the aspect of the discriminating intellect. Depending on the erroneously conceived world of objects, the mind develops the discrimination between liking and disliking. So your first question may say, well, what's the problem with liking and disliking? Why is that a problem? And that's a good question to ask. So as a baby, you begin to develop likes and dislikes. According to my mother, I liked, I think plums was what I liked the most as a child. Then plums are okay. I still, they're fine. So we start to pick up tastes early. We mimic the tastes of our families. We develop likes and dislikes. The obstacle, I won't say problem, the obstacle that this poses is that we start to draw strong distinctions. So for some of us, we may say, well, I like that, but I'm happy with something else, right? I'm not that rigid of a person. Other people, I've actually, in travel, I've encountered people who have the potential to have a wonderful travel experience, but their likes and dislikes around food or their ideas of food completely ruin their experience. So they have in their mind, well, this type of food is not right for me, or this type of food is a certain way. Um, and they just won't eat. And if you're not eating on a 1 or 2 week trip, it's not so enjoyable. So the like and dislike can become a very strong factor for how you see things. So we tend to see things in terms of our likes and dislikes. We don't see things in terms so much of like food, its nutritional value. So you don't necessarily go and say, "Oh, I want this piece of fruit because I heard it's very, nutritious." You say, "Well, that's what I like," right? Or I don't like this other one. We don't say, "Well, I don't like that despite its nutritional value," right? So we see things in a very one-dimensional way. So this like and dislike is an obstacle. Um, I use the food part because it's easy, but the Buddhist teaching is pointing towards our tendency to do this with everything. So we may say, "I don't like spicy food." So then if we contemplate going to a country that has spicy food, instantly we have this psychological obstacle. Well, I don't want to go to Thailand or Korea or somewhere in Mexico because I know that they only have spicy food, so I have a fear of going. Um, but we do this with other things, with people, with cultures. Well, I think those people are like this, or they eat this way, so that's an obstacle for me. Um, and we do it with politics. We do it with how open we are to other people. So the like and dislike creates a subtle damage to ourselves. We cut ourselves off from a great deal of potential. We may become so deeply rooted in our perspective, like our situatedness. Right? This is where I am. This is who I am. And if I'm asked to step outside of that, I'm going to be very uncomfortable. So we limit. And then if we see people engage in something different, we have a tendency to sort of put up walls and barriers. So this is the first step. The mind develops this discrimination because of liking and disliking. So the text is telling us we have to be careful in that area. Liking something or disliking something is okay. You might like broccoli, you might not. Um, but we have to be careful, right? That when we go to broccoli land, we don't have a subtle uh, prejudice against the broccophytes because they cultivate and eat broccoli and wear their hair in, special broccoli style twists or something. So these things can perpetuate and become a difficulty. I use this because I've actually seen it. I've actually seen people turn up their nose at whole groups of people because of the smell of their cooking. And I found it very odd, but that happens. So we have to be aware of all the ways that it can perpetuate. So this is something to be aware of. Okay, so the text goes on. First is the aspect of the discriminating intellect. Depending on the erroneously conceived world of objects, the mind develops the discrimination between liking and disliking. Oh, I read that one already. Second is the aspect of continuity. By virtue of the discriminating function of the intellect, the mind my PDF is a problem, so I'll read the original. Second is the aspect of continuity. By virtue of the discriminating function of the intellect, the mind produces an awareness of pleasure and pain with regard to things in the world of objects. The mind, developing deluded thoughts and being bound to them, will continue uninterrupted. So here's another example of how the mind functions. And this is probably, oddly, I will say my favorite, because I think it's the one that we're less conscious of, but has a profound impact. And so what it's saying here is the mind's tendency is to create loops. The mind's natural tendency is to repeat things it picks up. Um, our thoughts are on repeat. Songs get stuck in our head. Have you ever had a song stuck in your head? Right. We fixate on things. And with time and repetition, we end up creating patterns in the mind. So I'll quote Plato here because there's actually quite a bit in Greek philosophy that talks about this theme. So Plato, music and rhythm find their way into the secret places of the soul. Now you can take that as a good thing, right? The power of music in a good way, but it's also something you have to be aware of in terms of its, I guess what we would say in Western psychology, the subconscious effects that it may have. So I like to use music. So just before this, we started the Zoom. I checked the Billboard top 40 songs and to see what are the top 10 songs. And lo and behold, and this was my guess, the majority of them are hip hop songs. Why do you think that is? Any guesses? It's been this way for a while now. So hip hop has tended to be in the top 10 for several years. Anybody want to guess?
Generational.
Partially, but on this theme. You may not be hip hop listeners, so this may not will be a difficult question to answer. So here's my theory: it's the repetitive beats. So if you listen to hip hop, one of the reasons why it's catchy is the repetitive nature of the music. So it's this constant repetitive layering of beats. And drum beats are very primal for human beings. It gets in you. It's a rhythm that gets in you. So you'll find yourself tapping your foot to this rhythm and maybe not consciously aware of that. So you have a tendency to pick up on it faster. These are the songs you get stuck in your head faster. The riffs and little hooks of the songs get stuck in your head faster. Pictures don't get stuck in your head so much, right? You don't have a scene from a movie that's just, oh gosh, I can't get that one scene of Die Hard out of my head. I just, over and over all day long, I just couldn't get that scene. But music, you'll wake up the next day and you'll find yourself brushing your teeth and the same song. So those repetitive loops are very powerful and they create pathways in your mind. And once you start liking that kind of repetitive music and that repetitive beat, it's hard to then go to something else that isn't as catchy. So why do I make the connotation or connection with hip hop and repetitive beats? Is it because I'm secretly spinning records over here and I have a secret? I'm DJ Kosho at after 9 o'clock. No, it's the same reason why military would go into battle with drums. So they had war drums, and they would get people hyped up to go into battle. There would be music to accompany the military as they went in, and they didn't play violin when they went to war. It was the beat, the rhythm, especially drumming. So there's a natural tendency to follow in. The mind follows this tendency of repetition. Going back to the Buddha's time, they had war elephants and they would have drummers leading the military in the battle. If you watch YouTube, and this kind of thing is filled with these examples, but you'll have young people who were in Iraq or Afghanistan, and they've taken video on their cell phones, and they almost always have a soundtrack going in the Humvee or the tank or something like that, and it's there's a doom 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 kind of march to war theme. So this is an area where you go back to the drafting of the Awakening of Faith, and they're saying be careful of these patterns, this repetitive pattern, and music is an example of how that gets into us. So it's something that we have to take care of. So why do we use recitation of mantra over and over and over. So we're using the same nature of the mind to push it in a more helpful direction rather than a mindless, it got into me and all week long you're snapping your fingers to the same beat. So is the message here, don't listen to hip hop and don't listen to the, whatever's the top 10 songs in the country? No, that's not what I'm saying. But analyze, take a look, what's on your playlist if you're listening to music, and then ask, why is that on my playlist? Look at your playlist and ask, what emotions do I have when I listen to that music? And then see if it's what you thought it was. So it's a good experiment. When I was growing up, that same music was very popular, and people liked to get themselves amped up to a particular soundtrack before they went and did something unwholesome, we'll say. And it was not Beethoven that they were listening to. So it's just keep in mind, this is the nature, how the mind works is to have this repetition. So this aspect of continuity, right? So the mind grafts onto something and repeats it. It's on a loop. So we have to be aware. This is a big obstacle to meditation. When I first started meditating, I noticed that's exactly what would come up. I'd sit down and it would just be this repetitive beat and songs. So I wouldn't listen to music for hours before my meditation. And I used to challenge people, if you're leaving the temple afterwards, try to drive home in silence. Don't turn the radio on, and just observe your experience. How are things different on the walk or drive home if you're not listening to music? So when the world opens up again, just be conscious of how many people are wearing headphones. It really changes. So before the Walkman, people would jog without music. Amazing. But now you almost see no one doing that. Okay.
So can I interject one thing about
Absolutely.
Beethoven?
Yes.
Clockwork Orange, buddy. Clockwork Orange.
Good example. Very good example.
All right. That's all I got.
Well, that's good. No, that'll be on our that should be on our movie list also. We have good conversation about that one. So I'll go on to the third. So third is the aspect of attachment. Because of the continuity of deluded thoughts, the mind superimposing its deluded thoughts on the world of objects and holding fast to the discrimination of liking and disliking develops attachments to what it likes. Surprise. The things we like. So partially this is obvious, but it's the aspect of attachment now brought to a new aspect or a new area of this analysis. So I'm going to continue my music example. Some of you may have heard of this, but they're actually using music to drive people away from loitering and to reduce crime. Any idea what kind of music that is? Classical. So I found articles on the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra's website entitled Vivaldi on Duty. And they're actually using, and found that it does work, if you play music, classical music, especially outside areas where people usually loiter and commit crime, they don't loiter and there's much less crime. So I think, again, if you're going to do something unwholesome, you have to kind of amp yourself up. Okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to steal, and then you steal. But if you've got something else to distract you from it, it disrupts that aspect of the mind. So what the text is asking us is, in the beginning of the awakening of faith, is laying out all the ways the mind functions, so that when we do meditation, we do practice, we know what we're looking for. So this is the early stages. Okay, we're going to go on a hike. But before we go on a hike, I have to explain to you what a path is, what rocks and trees are, what kind of plants to look out for. So that when you get out there, you know kind of what you're looking at and how it operates. Um, it's also asking us, the more you're becoming aware of it, the more you can then take control. So you want to have a good understanding of the function of things so that you are in control rather than allowing your likes and dislikes, or someone drives by with your music loud and suddenly their music has hijacked your mind. Suddenly something outside is now in control. So this is a difficult, especially the repetitive thinking is probably one of the more difficult things to cut off in meditation. Sometimes, especially when we're very emotional about things, the repetitive nature of thoughts, we perseverate. We really, really focus on one thing, and it's difficult to let go of it. It's difficult to put down. So this is one of the areas that we need to be really aware of. This is the kind of without doing any work, the mind's going to do this, right? So if you just let go of the rein, just the way it's going to run. So it's a really good thing to put in a text like the Awakening in Faith, so that if you find that happening, you can say, aha, the text is right. This is the way the mind functions without any intervention. So if that's happening, it's not just normal. It's not that, well, that happens to everyone. It's the text telling you, Asvaghosh is saying, this is what the Buddha was talking about. This is, you can change that. And if you do, the quality of mind totally changes. This idea is even more powerful if you attach it to like and dislike, and you actually put it on love and hate. So I think right now, maybe more than ever, we probably all have a friend or family member who disagrees with us vehemently about politics. And due to social media, you get to see the innermost thoughts of people posted publicly. And then it's up to us how we react or respond to that. And you can then read something or see a yard sign or a bumper sticker, you get enraged, or you feel this anger. And this is what the text is talking about. We are holding on so tightly to our like or dislike. We've developed deep attachments. We've developed such deep attachments that they've become very unhelpful. So if you read evil in the text, understand it is unhelpful. It's a little bit too literal of a translation. So it's not actually evil, but we're developing a new obstacle by holding on to like and dislike so strongly. Should you have no attachments? No, that's crazy. I have a very strong attachment to oxygen. When there's no oxygen, I'm very unhappy. So as long as you're alive, you'll have attachments. What you're trying to observe is, how do those attachments drive you? Or are you driving them, right? Who's behind the wheel? That's what you want to see. We often, those likes and dislikes, those attachments become so strong that it's like we've drawn a line in the sand. We can't see past it, and we become very rigid in our thinking. And the reason that's so important is that rigidity drives us to very kind of extreme thinking. So this week, I hadn't heard this before, because I do try to limit the social media. But someone asked about this pandemic. What are they talking about? Are you pronouncing it wrong? Do you mean pandemic? But it's sort of this belief that somehow the coronavirus is a plot, and someone is profiting from making people believe that they should stay home. That somehow that's in someone's benefit or in someone's interest. And initially I thought, well, how can you think that? And then I realized, well, it's the same as what the teaching's talking about. If we allow ourselves to be indoctrinated, right? You have this repetitive thump, thump, messaging and ideas, and it's only very one-sided, then the minute that same messaging source or perspective says it's all a plot, it's all a conspiracy theory, then we latch onto that too. That goes on repeat. So once we're conditioned to this repetitive thinking, it's easy for just anything to populate in there. The Buddhist teaching is thick with metaphors about gardening. So if you've ever gardened or tried gardening, you'll notice that certain things that you want to grow take a lot of energy, but weeds seem to have no problem growing anywhere. So this is us being asked to be on guard. I was pulling weeds earlier. I was like, I just pulled this weed, but of course it rained, so the weed pops right back up. But the flowers take more energy. So this is where we have to be very, very aware. Okay, so I'll go on to the fourth one. Fourth is the aspect of the speculation, vikalpa, on names and letters, meaning concepts. On the basis of erroneous attachments, the deluded mind analyzes words which are provisional and therefore devoid of validity. Okay, so finally we come to a section that is a little bit more cryptic. So, and we're introduced to the Sanskrit word vikalpa. So what does vikalpa mean? Its literal meaning is discrimination. So the aspect of the mind that makes distinctions. It has a couple different nuances from the Sanskrit. So one of those can refer to the mental action of being partial, biased, or when you limit your outlook on things. So that's one way. But it's a way of viewing your subjectivity. So it's a bit of a technical Sanskrit term, but a lot of times, going back to the Sanskrit, you'll get a lot more nuance in these terms. So looking at our subjectivity, our bias, our triggers around words and language. So this is very common, right? We use a lot of labels, unfortunately, in the West. I just had to go through a survey, and part of the survey was, they said, okay, well, for government reporting purposes, we need to get your gender and age and ethnicity, and so that can be a trigger for people. They get asked that question. I don't want to be, I don't want to be categorized. I don't want that. So that may be okay, but we have that same reaction to a variety of different language triggers, the way language is used. I grew up in the Midwest, Michigan, so certain terms would identify you right away as someone who wasn't from there. So if you said cola or soda, we knew you were not a local. It's pop. By the way, it's pop. It will always be pop. And if you, right, so certain words can be a trigger, right? What? You're not from around here, right? So right away, right? So it's a very simple word, right? 3 letters or 4 letters. Which side of the fence are you on? Well, right away, oh, you're from out of town, right? So immediately make a distinction. Instead of just answering the question, do you sell soda? We all know what it is. We have to go, oh, you triggered me. I have to make this distinction. So this is this concept of vikalpa, that it happens to us in many different ways. I try to use ways that aren't going to set any of us off, but there's many aspects of language that can be very triggering for us. So we have to be aware and on guard. So the text is asking us to do that as well. Now, does that mean that you should never, take the opportunity to have a teachable moment? No, not at all. You just need to be aware of when you're triggered. Oh, that term is upsetting. So maybe you're able to explain to someone, perhaps you should use different language in this setting, and it's more friendly, or it's a better use of language. So it's not to say, oh, you should just take abuse if you're given abuse verbally, or someone uses a term that you don't like. It's being aware of what it's doing to you. Right? So I took a walk earlier, true story, and I don't know what, because I couldn't hear it, but someone rolled down the window and they looked very angry and they were screaming out the window at me. And I thought, oh, I didn't understand what they said, but I could allow that situation to, be triggering. Oh, I'm going to be upset with the person for screaming something. It's kind of funny. They were driving too fast, so you only hear the revving of the engine, but you have to be aware of what those circumstances do to yourself, right? So they drove on by, but am I going to hold on to the frustration of the word? So this is what the text is asking us to do. Be very aware of what's happening in the mind. There's a lot of nuance to that term. The term vikalpa comes from the a bigger idea about the five aggregates in the body and an entire kind of philosophical structure. So there's a lot more. I'm not going to bore you right now, but by inserting the term vikalpa, there's a lot of at this time when this text was written in India, there's a lot of debate about how you should see things. So are there actually discrete dharmas or laws of the universe that are unbreakable, or is everything sort of illusory? So that conversation is happening. So by pointing out the vikalpa here, Asvagosha as well as the translator sort of telling you where Asvagosha stands. So that's part of the reason why the word is used there. But I'm not going to go too much into that because everyone will fall asleep. Let's see. If you take the example of someone who gets really triggered by political stuff, we may all have opinions. There may be times when we all get upset, but we really have to ask, are we overly attached to a particular viewpoint or overly attached to others having our same viewpoint? So I think right now that's a time that we have to reflect on it, because a lot of us we have more time perhaps on our hands than we had before, and we're watching news for updates on things, and it can be very triggering. So it's a good opportunity to reflect why we're triggered, if we're triggered, and in what way. So to illustrate this better, let's see. So the mind analyzes words which are provisional, so and therefore devoid of reality. So what is America obsessed with? What's our big obsession? Besides sports, which we can't watch right now. What's on every morning TV show? There's a new what?
You threw me with the TV.
What's that?
Oh, diet?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? You threw me with the TV.
TV? Oh, that's very true. I was going to use the example of diet. So we get very focused on a physical form. There's always some weight loss magic. So forever these come up. So have you ever heard of the diet called the gentle gradual diet? How to be kind to your body and look your best. Have you heard of this diet? No, because that's not how Americans work. It always has to be some extreme diet, or eat one thing, never eat the other thing. It always has to be like results within X number of days. It's always 90 days or less. There's never more than that, right? Because you're not going to buy the book that says a new you in 3,427 days. No, you want the like instant results. So it's always something extreme. So I think we're sort of focused on this. So the person selling it to us is shouting. They're never kind. They're just yelling at us. If the person is already like really fit and in good shape, then they're blaming you for not being like them. um, they're just yelling obscenities at the screen, and you're watching, and if you want this, and it's because you haven't done that, and you're weak, and so we're like, yeah, we just more and more extreme, extreme, extreme. Um, so I sent this using this example because someone sent me a video this week, um, and they asked if I was related to this guy, and he is a former special forces person, and I could see the resemblance. Could definitely be a cousin or something. Um, and he's talking about all of his achievements in Ironman and marathons and this kind of thing, and it's like just very like uh, hyper masculine testosterone oozing, and it's like sweating testosterone is and I thought this is a very common um, approach, that it has to be very very extreme, and this sort of like motivation on steroids sort of a perspective. And the reason I bring this up is it's kind of very typical for our country. It's get up and do it. If you don't do it, it's your own failing. It's your own fault kind of approach. And that's very different than the Buddhist teaching. But I think we have a tendency to read, if the problem is ignorance, then I got to get rid of all the ignorance. If the problem is liking and disliking, I won't like anything, and I won't dislike anything. So we go to this very extreme perspective right away. And if people want help, we kind of, no matter where we are on the spectrum, sometimes we think, well, based on my condition, I'm conditioned to think this way, and maybe you aren't worthy of my assistance, right? What have you done to make yourself, worthy of getting my help if you're asking for my help? So we stop and we think of that. So there's a social trauma, I want to say, built into our thinking. I've heard it from people who've come back from Peace Corps. And they're like, well, I'll help the people over there, but not the ones here, right? Somehow these are different. Someone's different or not worthy of my help. So I bring this up because what the awakening of faith is trying to get us to see is the perspective of the Bodhisattva. And the perspective of the Bodhisattva is the reason these distinctions are dangerous is because we're doing a violence to ourselves. We're wearing ourselves down. We're hardening ourselves to any kind of compassion, any kind of openness. And it has nothing to do with the external. It has nothing to do with what we're seeing in our external likes and dislikes. It has everything to do with us observing what it's doing to us. And that's really important. But we don't get that message anywhere. And the Bodhisattva isn't responding this way, right? You won't see that, someone came to the Buddha and asked a question, and the Buddha says, well, why are you asking it like that? Why are you asking it today? Don't you see I'm busy? He doesn't blow people off in this format. But we, I think more so in the United States, he kind of hardened to this perspective. So if you keep reading the fifth one, fifth is the aspect of giving rise to evil karma. So remember, I said, please read evil as unhelpful. Relying on names and letters, for example, concepts which have no validity, deluded mind, investigates names and words and becomes attached to them and creates manifold types of evil karma. So evil, unhelpful, or obstacle, speed bump, read it like that. And then karma, remember it's volitional action, not fate. So we tend to culturally read karma as some sort of fate or retribution. So you go to the store and it says, please don't steal, it's bad karma. So we tend to have a very one-sided view of karma, but karma itself should be just read as volitional action. I'm going to share my screen so you can see a diagram. So can you guys all see that? So this section, so relying on names and letters, is a nod towards the 12 links of dependent causation. And what you'll see are this very unique theory in Buddhism. So this is considered one of the unique philosophical additions that the Buddha gave. And this aspect of our understanding names and letters, labeling things, is part of the 12 links of dependent causation. So we've talked about this before. Sometimes it's helpful just to see it again. And I bring it up here only, not that we're going to go through the 12 links of dependent causation right now, but when we're moving from that present effects, this consciousness having contact with mind and matter, having an effect on the six sense bases, your senses, you have this contact and feeling. This is the cycle of developing the like and dislike and what it leads to. So this is a sort of subtle reference to the 12 links of dependent causation. So if anybody's interested, you can find us, but this is the sometimes called the 12 links of dependent origination, dependent causation, or here they're saying the cycle of dependent origin. This is sort of the structure of this movement of karma and kind of where we're going. So we're looking to break the cycle. So where do we break the cycle? The more we have insight into each of the components, the more we're able to stop the movement from one to the next. So this is what the text is talking about. So as our actions and choices build up, right, we have all these different likes and dislikes. It has a progressive effect to push us in a particular direction. So we build up a tremendous number of likes or things that we dislike, and we're building towards something. And that push on us can become stronger and stronger. And then the question is, how do we resist it? So this is where I think kind of that great philosophical or theological question comes up. Do we have free will? From the Buddhist standpoint, yes. From a practical standpoint, you may feel like you may say to yourself, I don't feel like I had a choice. I just got carried along. And that's true based on our repetitive thinking, the tendency of certain thoughts to sort of become ingrained in the mind. So we feel like I'm not really in control. But part of this study is gaining insight into how the mind creates those patterns and what it does to us. So when it says here, how does it phrase it? Giving rise to evil karma. I will say we have a mounting debt of karmic accumulations. So it builds up, and it may then feel like we have no control, and that certain outcomes are inevitable. So the question is, how far can you push until you've been pushed too far? In any scenario, what's the point of no return? So part of what we want to gain as insight in meditation is when we sort of move too far in one direction, right? We want to come back to our center. So it may not be noticeable to us in the moment, but the more sort of meditative insight we have on a situation, the more we'll be able to actually see, oh, I'm really overextended, or I've really gone beyond my comfort zone, or I'm really sort of out in an area that I don't recognize myself anymore. But in the moment, we don't recognize it. You know, if you've ever seen someone get really angry, their face changes, their words change, their whole face can contort, and they may not even be aware of it. They may catch a glimpse of themselves in a mirror and see it, and then realize and calm down. And that's an extreme, but the awakening of faith is saying it's happening to us all the time, and we're not aware. So again, why why these 6 categories? Um, I brought up in the last section, under section 4, this sort of extreme thinking or very strong reaction to things. And the reason it's brought up is that's not how the Bodhisattva reacts to things. The Bodhisattva comes to these, comes to us in our scenario and looks for a way to help. Right, the response is very different. And from our perspective, it may seem like a superpower. But if you read the sutras or any story of the bodhisattvas, they look at a situation, they ask, how can they help? So they say, oh, I was in a difficult situation. I had a hard childhood, or something horrible happened to me. And so they then use it as a way to fuel their change. So we like those stories, right? Morning TV shows are filled with someone overcoming some huge obstacle. So those obstacles should be fuel. So that's part of what we're looking at. For some of us, it's something really dramatic. For others, it's just, think back to what do you think is your greatest achievement, right? What big thing did you overcome that you're like, oh, that really changed me. That was a turning point. It could be something like really dramatic that makes the evening news, or it could be something, hey, I passed a test and that was a really difficult thing for me. Whatever it is, whatever you've then gotten over, the bodhisattva, if you look at the vows of a bodhisattva, it's always, in the future, if there was anyone who went through what I went through, I want to help them. In the future, if I'm able to, perfect this spiritual path, then I want to make a way for those people who had it hard like I had it. So the text is saying not this 90 days to a new you, or, only eat one food and you'll have this revolutionary change. It's saying, as a first step, as a very important first step, just be really conscious and aware of where you are. Really see it, understand it, see how your mind is functioning. And then when you have a good grasp of it, oh, okay, now that's where I am. That's my fuel for change. And then when you're ready to say, okay, I'm going to look more forward thinking like the Bodhisattva, anyone who has this set of circumstances, then I want to help them in the same way, if someone had been there to help me. So I pulled myself up by my enlightenment bootstraps. So can you. No, that's not how the Bodhisattva says it. It says, this was the most difficult thing in my life, so I want to be there for that person. Right? They don't scream and yell at the TV. That's not the perspective. But almost every message we get is sort of that perspective. I did this kind of wild and crazy thing, and there's nothing stopping you but your excuses. That's a message that sells a lot of books and viral videos, but it's very different from what this book is talking. However, this one has endured longer, so it may not sell as many copies this year. However, it will still be around. Okay, so the 6. 6 is the aspect of anxiety attached to the effects of evil karma. Because of the law of karma, the deluded mind suffers the effects and will not be free. Pretty straightforward. So again, evil, read it as unhelpful or obstacle. So we're back now kind of full circle to the effect. If we let the mind run free, if we never gain insight, if we fail to see its patterns, if we rely on sort of just sort of our innate intelligence or our street smarts and say, like, well, I'm getting by, then we're missing the fact that these patterns are driving us rather than us. We're not seeing the change. So I won't necessarily mention the person specifically. He might come looking for me because he's a special forces person, but I was intrigued. So I watched a little bit of his video, he was all the things he achieved. I lost all this weight, and I got super strong, and I went through all the special forces, training that you could do, and I was really great at that. And I've gone on to do all these. I've done a million Ironmans, and I've climbed Mount Everest 500 times. And not only that, I carried like 10 people on my back up Mount Everest. It was just all these like physical things that most people can't do. So undoubtedly changed his life, turned around. Um, what was interesting though, later on he said, oh yeah, I rubbed people the wrong way in the process. I didn't make a lot of friends while I was doing it. So the guys I served with probably didn't like me very much because I was too intense, because I embarrassed them, because I would do more. And part of it was, I think, a bit of a brag, and part of it was this sort of introspective view. So if you're making enemies along the way, it's a blind spot, right? There's still, what does the text say? The aspect of anxiety attached to the effects of evil karma. So it's not always that you get your comeuppance as like a boomerang, it comes back to you, but there's an anxiety. There's an anxiety that you carry with you. And at least in my experience, that anxiety can really eat you up, be very difficult, keep you up at night, disrupt your health and your relationships, and can be a very difficult thing. So does it mean that if you practice Buddhism, you're going to be somehow free of all hardships? No. Even the Buddha's, famously, the Buddha's cousin tried to kill him on numerous occasions. The key, though, is, did the Buddha's cousin try to kill him because the Buddha burned bridges and screwed him over, or, purposely set him up to make him look bad? No, his cousin was jealous of his achievements. So those things you can't fix. But did the Buddha have anxiety? Like, oh, I shouldn't have treated my cousin that way. And if only, I spent more time with him as a kid. And I know I promised to take him to the park, but I was too busy, achieving enlightenment. And I let him down. I know I was going to tutor him on his homework, but I was lecturing to the monks. No, just his cousin was like, well, I should be that person. I should be the one that they bow to, right? It's his own thing. So that, when we're looking at the function of our mind, when we're looking at what really has impact, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I got beat up once or twice. And the beating, or we called it back then the lickings he took, that pain didn't last very long. But the anxiety about running into those kids, that I had anxiety about, like, oh, I better go a different way home from school. So the anxiety, that mental pressure that we have is incredibly strong. And a lot of times we chalk it up to just, well, that's normal, that's natural. But the awakening of faith is saying it isn't. And that the more we understand the process, the more we'll be at ease, the more we have peace. And at least I think that kind of peace is invaluable. A lot of times we focus a lot on, probably not if you're watching this, you've taken the time to listen to this, but a lot of times we focus on external things in terms of making us happy. But, every time I've ever watched a documentary and the documentarian is in some place where people have very little, they always look very happy. And the bigger thing that you want to cultivate is this understanding of the mind, because that's getting rid of the anxiety. We're all going to get older. We're all going to get gray hair. We're all going to, things in life will change, but we can control the anxiety, right? That comes with all of those things. So that's what this teaching is about, right? The aspect of anxiety to the effects of evil karma. Because of the law of karma, the deluded mind suffers the effects and will not be free. So how do you gain freedom? The mental freedom. observation, understanding how the mind works. Personally, if my cousin was trying to kill me, I'd be very afraid because my cousin's arms are like the size of my thighs. He's incredibly strong. He's a lot bigger than me. If you've ever seen me in person, I'm 6'2". My cousin is like, it's like the Incredible Hulk version. So I'm lucky that my cousin likes me, but having the anxiety is worse often than the actual outcome. So the more we take time to observe the patterns in the mind, the more we take time to address that anxiety, the better off I think we can be. So that anxiety can really eat us up, and we're fearing retribution. So that section ends with the sentence, "It should be understood that ignorance is able to produce all types of defiled states. All defiled states are aspects of non-enlightenment." So whether it be anxiety, fear, anything, anytime we don't see how the mind is functioning, it can give rise to all types of deluded states, right? All kinds of odd thinking can come up. Where, like I said, with, at least for me, with social media, I can kind of watch in real time people's inner thoughts. A news story comes out or something comes up, and you see right away what it's doing to them, their anxiety, fears, what it brings up for them, or their responses. And this week we've had a lot of that kind of news stories, and I think it shows that what the Awakening of Faith is talking about is real. So none of us can change. We can't snap our fingers and turn off the coronavirus. But I think if we take a little bit of time to reflect on what it's doing to us in terms of anxiety, how it's manifesting in other ways, we'll be much better for it than if we assume, well, everyone's going through it, so there's nothing I can do, right? So we do have control over this part. As happens, I've talked for more time than we have time for meditation at the end. However, I will ask if there's any questions about the part we went over this evening. So the next, yes.
Would it be possible for you to send out that diagram of the dependent origination?
Yes, not a problem. What would be easiest for people? Email, or we can post it on the website. Sorry, I froze. I'm not sure if everybody else froze. I'll just repeat. We can email it out. We can post it to our Facebook page or website. All the above. I will.
Is it possible just to attach it in the comments?
Oh yes, actually. I totally forgot. You can send files through this. Here.
Okay.
I will send it now.
Instant gratification always is instant.
Yes. So it should be in the chat.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I totally forgot that feature. So we're all working together. So that's a very simple one. I do have a more detailed one that describes dependent origination, Pratitya Samutpada, and then kind of looks backwards and forwards in terms of the functioning. So it's actually really good. I have to find it. I used it in a class a number of years ago where we went through this in detail. And I think it was a professor, I don't remember what university, but they had actually created it and shared it, but it was really, really well done, and had the technical terms. So if I can find that, I'll try to have it next week and I can share it for you. But that's a um, good example. Are there any other questions?
I just had a quick question. Can you
Yes.
hear me? Oh,
Yes.
okay. I thought when I thought of anxiety related to it says evil karmic, or obstacles and this sort of thing. I thought of anxiety of losing face. And I thought maybe you could kind of comment on that a little bit because I think that's a big thing.
No, it is actually. There's a whole section in the Avatamsaka Sutra that discusses the karmic obstacle of name, and it's a little cryptic if you don't read classical Chinese. So to be famous in Chinese is called Yoming, and it literally translates as knowing a name. So to be famous or remembered means that people remember your name or they know your name, which makes sense, right? Everyone knows your name, right? That's fame to some degree. But it's very much an obstacle to that part of the Avatamsaka Sutra goes through typical obstacles for humanity, and especially different cultures. And so losing face and honor cultures can be an entire different type of anxiety or obstacles for a person, and not so much a thing in the West, but in many cultures, losing face. Well, I should say not so much in majority culture. A lot of minority cultures, and then later immigrants to the United States still carry that with them. But you can see it with the family name, attaching a name to certain things, that maintaining that status can be its own obstacle, and it's huge and it's very difficult. It's not terribly don't ever make my mistake of trying to tell someone for whom that is very important that it isn't very important, or to just kind of get over it. It's a much deeper it's felt very deeply. So that in itself can be an obstacle. Now, does that mean that it's not, you should just discard it? Well, it's in the Avatamsaka Sutra and I'm Buddhist, so that means I should discard it. No, it means you have to understand very deeply how it operates. And the more you understand how it operates, then instead of it being in control of you, you can understand how it affects you. So having honor, having a name can be useful. Let's say it's your business and that name stands for quality and doing a good job, and then it's working very well. But that does come with some anxiety of what if my good name is soiled, or my good name is dragged through the mud in some way. So that is an important component, especially in human culture, that I think in the West sometimes we overlook, and in other cultures it is it's incredibly strong. The classic examples, of course, are Asian cultures. However, I was watching a documentary. It was a British documentary about the war in Afghanistan, and a lot of it had to do from the perspective of their troops. And I thought it was very interesting because they were interviewing, and they got very good, candid interviews of both sides. So they had interviews with Taliban, interviews with just your average local people, and one of the commanders. And there was an American commander over there, and he was talking about how difficult it was to do the job because every time they go on patrol, from time to time, inevitably, they have to engage in, war. That's why they're there. And there's, they attack the wrong village, or, they kill the wrong person. And one of the problems they said was he didn't see a way out of it, because in the culture, if you killed a family member, then the proper retribution was for the family to kill 8 of the enemy. So he said, this is a perpetual, how do you get out of that? How do you say you're sorry? How do you make amends? How do you pay retribution? How do you make people feel whole if that's the case? So I thought, like, oh, that's really, that's so deeply ingrained in the culture that when, troops will go out and say, oh, we're going to give you a clean water project in your village, that everyone's holding on very deeply to, we still need to get our retribution for something that happened, years ago. And they're communicating in ways of, well, let's build you a school. Well, we need you to sacrifice X number of people. So one's faith or honor is understood in a variety of different nuanced ways, and can be a major impediment to how we see the world. So again, that's not something we can just turn off, but I think the Buddhist teaching is inviting us to really kind of radically examine it and understand all the different ways that it's operating. I've said it before, my classic example is my Chinese teacher in college. His dream was to stay in the United States and be a professor, and he ended up going back to Taiwan because he had to take over the family business, because that was what he was expected to do, and he had to save face for his family. And here he was, the eldest son, and so that was his duty. So it doesn't mean necessarily that you turn away from it, but the more, I think, in any of those scenarios, as human beings, we understand how it operates. We don't just say, don't just sort of throw our hands up and say, oh well. The more we kind of really, really see it, and how it's functioning for us, what it's doing to us, how our interaction with it has effects on others, we can navigate those things much better. It's not as I'll never forget his face when he said goodbye to the class, because he was leaving. He was, heartbroken or crestfallen, or there's got to be a better word, right? So those are things that oftentimes we need to see, and the earlier we do it, the better. So all of these things are, the Awakening of Faith is a commentary, so it's short. The Avatamsaka has so many scenarios about human behavior and the effects it has on us that we're probably not aware of. So it's a really great resource. But I'm looking at the abridged version over there, and it's still like this thick. So
So, Sensei, is there a equivalent sort of cultural value you think in American culture that one could compare face to? Or anyone
yeah,
that
keeping your
occurs
word
to
as a
you?
man, that kind of thing. I don't want to I don't want to parrot Game of Thrones or something, but paying your debts.
Oh yeah.
I think that historically, whether we are aware of it or not, but the concept of bankruptcy grows out of the American colonialists wanting to break out of the whole debtor's prison. So Western culture has taken a very dim view of debt, and the United States has tried to take a different turn on that. But whether it's ourselves or someone we know, or just a cliche scene from a movie, getting a phone call from someone trying to collect money, we often don't get compassion for that. Like, people suffer in silence over that scenario. So there's a certain shame attached to debt.
It's a personal failing.
Yeah. So I do think, and I can't tell you how many young men I've talked to who feel like they can't propose until they have a certain amount of money. That, and I've often been called by the young lady saying, "Tell him it's okay. He has to propose. It's fine. I don't care." But that can be seen, I think, in our culture as a very deep personal failing and difficulty. And people suffer gratefully, oftentimes in silence. So those are the ones that come to mind right away. I see we're right at 8:30, so I know some of you are in different time zones. I want to give you time to get some rest. Some of us may be in Pacific time and may still need to eat, or other time zones. So I want to be respectful of your time. I appreciate you being available and online this evening. We'll just end with the mantra for Kobodashi, the Kohoko. Namo Daishi Henjo Kongo. Namo Daishi Henjo Kongo. Namo Daishi Henjo Kongo. Thank you all very much. Hope to see you next week. And I think we do have some, if you haven't given feedback on the movie, please do. And then I'll send out the movie that I have in mind, and we can have a secondary conversation, hopefully. You can do more talking, less me talking, and I can do some listening. So I'd like to hear people's feedback and ideas also. So thank you so much. And as usual, if you have ideas.
Thank you, Sensei.
Yeah. Thank you so much. If you have ideas or feedback, feel free to email me, or if there's questions you don't want to ask online, I'm happy to answer offline too. So have a good night.